We got a really special car today, 1986 Ferrari 328 GTS. And I know this is a bit outside the box of what we normally do or review on this channel. And I'll be the first to say I'm not an exotic car guy by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not a big Lamborghini fan, I'm not a big Porsche fan, and it's really hard for me to say that and be a car guy. I like the weird, unusual cars like orphan cars and stuff. But there's a place in my heart for this car after spending the day with it. We borrowed this Ferrari 328 GTS from John Kufleitner's, and it's currently on sale. John Kufleitner's in Salem, Ohio. You could check it out. The link is in the description. It's jkgalleria.com. If you just stumbled upon this channel, welcome. I'd invite you to hit that like button and also subscribe if you dig all things automotive, especially classic cars. We feature a lot of classic cars on this channel, especially cars that are orphan cars, or cars that are not on the beaten path, so to speak. If you're into that, consider subscribing. Let's talk about the 1986 Ferrari 328 GTS. Produced from 1985 to 1989, the Ferrari 328 GTS is the successor to the Ferrari 308, which was the Ferrari used in Magnum PI. Magnum PI was a crime show series that was produced in the mid-1980s. I honestly never watched an episode of Magnum PI, but back to the Ferrari 328 GTS. The name 328 comes from the engine. It's a 3.2 liter engine, and the 8 comes from the cylinders. It's a V8. It was offered in two different trim distinctions, the GTS and the GTB. The GTS stands for, and I'm going to struggle with this because there's a lot of really funky names in Italian, and I have a speech impediment problem as it is, so I'm going to apologize up front that, hey, I'm not going to get all this right. But anyway, the GTS stood for the Gran Turismo Spider or Targa top. It had a removable top. Or the GTB, which stood for the Gran Turismo Berlinetta. Okay, let's talk about some specs of the 1986 Ferrari 328 GTS. It rides a wheelbase of 92.5 inches long. The overall length of the car is 167.5 inches long, 68.1 inches wide, 44.4 inches tall. It weighs 2,784 pounds. There was 7,412 of them produced in between the years of 1985 and 1989. It was designed by Leonardo Oravani, who worked closely with Pininfarina. I'm sorry if I butchered both of those. Let's talk about the engine that is powering the Ferrari 328 GTS. It is a 3.2 liter Tipo F105CB V8. That is the actual name of it. I think it's hilarious. The transmission's a 5-speed manual through a gated shifter. But getting back to the engine in the 328 uses the Ferrari Dino engine that was produced from the late 1950s to the early 2000s. The engine is very similar in design to the 308 Quattro. The model featured 4 valves per cylinder, transverse layout, Bosch K, Jetronic fuel injection. It produced between 266 brake horsepower to 270 brake horsepower, 231 foot-pounds of torque, which those numbers really don't sound that impressive now, but the top speed was... Now, it also depended on whether or not you got the GTB or the GTS. In which case, if you got the GTB, it was actually faster, 0 to 60 in 5.5 seconds, 166 mile per hour top speed. The GTS, which is the car that we have, 0 to 60 in 5.9 seconds, 163 miles per hour. Just to mention, they did make a turbo model, 1986 to 1989. It used a smaller displacement engine, a 2-liter engine. Only 636 were produced. So just mentioning it, if you wanted more power, baby, you could in the turbo model, but I bet it was colossally expensive considering how many they made. Let's talk chassis. The 328 frame is consisted of an oval-shaped tubular steel, giving it a race car rigidity without a significant weight penalty. Body is mostly steel with an aluminum front hood or bonnet. Fiberglass is sandwiched in between the steel floor pan, and they also introduced galvanized steel, which was key improvement from previous models, drastically cutting back on the corrosion. Independent front and rear suspension used a traditional unequal length double wishbone design, and it included coil springs, hydraulic, telescoping, shock absorbers. It also featured front and rear anti-roll bars. The steering system was the rack and pinion type, but it didn't have any power assist. It was manual steering, and it was slightly quicker lock to lock than previous generations, with 3.25 turns lock to lock. It's also worth mentioning that the early cars didn't have ABS or traction control or any of that BS to screw up your driving experience. It was just you and the road. Okay, let's talk about this door panel. Just look at how it's designed. It's all nice and finished in leather. Notice this armrest, it runs about 3/4 of the way and it slants. But when you're in the car, it doesn't feel slanted. This little nub that sticks up, use it as like a door handle. This is as far down as the window goes. And notice this little notch right here. It's very interesting. The window switches are on the other side of the door handle here. And this controls the mirror. The mirror controls are right there. You also have a little secret compartment storage spot right there. And the door handles are right here. All right, let's go through the button switches and knobs. And I'm sorry, there's a bit of a glare. I couldn't get rid of the glare for whatever reason. Everywhere I tried to go to get rid of the glare, never worked. So I apologize, there's a glare. Starting at the top, there's a series of warning lights. Moving to the gauges, the speedometer is all the way to the left-hand side. There is an odometer at the top, and at the bottom, there's a trip meter. Top center, oil pressure. Bottom center is the temperature. We're not entirely sure. There's 2 temperature gauges in this car. I'm not sure if that's a water temperature gauge or an oil temperature gauge, because there are 2. It's kind of weird. You'll see what I mean when we go to the other set of gauges. But off to the right-hand side is the tachometer, as well as the high beam indication switch that your high beams are on is inside the tachometer. There's the turn signal indicator switches are inside the speedometer down there towards the bottom. There's a series of buttons on the bottom. Over to the left-hand side of the speedometer, that looks like a headlight switch button. In the center of the speedometer and the temperature gauge is the button to reset the trip meter. And then off to the right-hand side of the tachometer, there is a amp warning light. Okay, coming to the center, there's another series of gauges. You have a clock. In the middle, you have another temperature gauge. This temperature gauge in the center, it says 210. On the other temperature gauge, it's in the center, it says 195. Not entirely sure if this one's for coolant or oil, but it's just interesting. You have 2 different gauges with different numbers. And then the fuel gauge is on the end. Notice the Pioneer stereo right underneath. I'm pretty sure that's aftermarket. There's your ashtray. Notice the gated shifter. It's a really cool feature. Aside from these vents here, those are the only vents that are on the front of the dashboard. The other vents are located at the top here. This car does not have a glove box, but it has a console. It's locked. Some fuses in there. It's not a very big area for storage, but you still have it. There is also this area for storage. You can put glasses or maybe your cell phone in there. Okay, opening the bonnet or the hood. It's where your spare tire is. So if the trunk's not up here, where's the trunk located? The radiator and the fans are up here. Windshield washer, as well as a spare tire. So here's the other trunk right here. It's zipper activated. This feels like it's a toolkit. There might be enough space for 2, maybe 3, Maybe if you packed really efficiently, you might be able to get 4 golf bags in the back, depending on how big the golf bags are. So the gas filler is actually locked, and it's located right behind here. So this is where the gas goes. Only accessible with a key. There is another one on the other side that is also locked, but there's nothing there. So that's kind of interesting. Maybe it's for foreign markets if like when they sell this car in Europe, they put the gas filler on this side. Okay, on to the pros and cons. The pros and cons I'm getting from the complete book of collectible cars, blue chip auto investments of the past 70 years from 1930 to 2000. And for the pros, it says, as for the 1975 through 1985 308 series plus worthy detail improvements. So we have to go back to the 308 to figure out what the pros were. It's a pureless shape, one of PF's best. That's Pina Ferreira. Can't say that name that well. Fine performance, as little as 6 seconds to 0 to 60, exponentially style. We're going to go for the cons here too because it's probably the same. Tight 2-seater cockpit, which I can attest to that. This is one of the hardest cars that I ever had to get out of. The usual notchy mid-engine shifter, styling restrictions, outward vision, especially on the Spider, which I can attest to that. Little baggage space. So for the cons, it says, as for the 1975 through 85 308, which we already covered, but too new for collector market trends to be established. This book was published in the early 2000s. Probably need an updated version. Thank you guys so much for watching, and until next time, ta-ta.